November 14th, 2025, at Arrow 3.42 UTC, the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii captured something no one could have anticipated. 3I Atlas, the interstellar object approaching the sun, suddenly exploded at Perihelion, but instead of breaking apart like every comet ever observed, it resurrected. It did not disintegrate, it did not scatter into dust. It reappeared, stronger, brighter, and glowing with a shade of blue never before seen in the history of astronomical observation. In that moment, the entire framework of human physics was publicly challenged. If this is something moving into the solar system, not by coincidence, but by intention, then the question is no longer, what is it? But iridescent, who sent it, and why now? Before we continue, if you believe science is not a closed vault of facts, but a door to unresolved mysteries, stay with us. Share this video so more people can witness what's unfolding right above our skies. Because sometimes, truth does not come from what we already know, but from what we dare not look directly at. 3I Atlas, a name that once only evoked the image of a simple frozen fragment wandering from some distant corner of space, is now baffling and unsettling the entire scientific community. Not because it moves too fast, nor because its trajectory is strange, but because it returned from behind the sun with an entirely new appearance. A deep blue glow, more radiant than the very star that has warmed our solar system for billions of years. When that light appeared, it didn't just challenge scientists, it challenged the way we understand life, matter, and our very presence within this vast universe. According to the laws of thermal radiation, a body can only emit blue light when its temperature exceeds tens of thousands of Kelvin. Yet 3I Atlas, after passing perihelion, with a surface temperature 90% lower than that of the sun, shines with a light that seems deliberate. The object is not hot enough to emit it. It is not ionized in the way a small star would be. It doesn't even shed mass violently enough to convert energy into thrust, as a typical comet would. It is not glowing. It seems to be turning on a light. Professor Brian Cox, a man who tirelessly seeks beauty in the logic of the universe, once said, "The universe is not required to be in perfect harmony with human ambition." And perhaps 3I Atlas is demonstrating that in the most dramatic way. The universe is under no obligation to make sense to us, but it always finds a way to pose its biggest questions the moment we think we know the answers. So what is special here? It's the blue light itself, a color that in astrophysics can only arise under two specific conditions. 1. An incredibly hot object emitting blue light as part of continuous radiation, such as giant O-type or B-type stars, or a burning gas planet at tens of thousands of Kelvin. 2. An active light source, meaning light generated not by heat, but through some kind of technological mechanism, something we only observe in civilizations capable of manipulating energy. When 3I Atlas shifted from red to blue, it wasn't just a change in color. It was a reversal of physical logic, a slap in the face of every formula we use to decode the universe. It raises the central question, is this still a comet, or is it something driven by intention? Perhaps this is where science intersects with mythology, because sometimes, to explain the unknown, we must dare to step away from what we are comfortable with. The most important question is no longer, why does it emit blue light? But rather, did someone or something want it to emit blue light? Fiona! And in that reflection, Brian Cox's familiar voice seems to echo, softly yet sharply. We are the cosmos made conscious, and life is the means by which the universe understands itself. Perhaps 3I Atlas is part of that story. Perhaps it is awareness sent toward us, to remind us that we are not the center of the universe. We are merely standing at the edge of a page not yet turned. The object is like a door painted in blue enamel, and when it emerged from behind the sun, like a creature crawling out of a sea of fire, it did not just change its own physical appearance, it changed the tone of the question, from what is it to who are we? If this is a signal, if this is an overture to a yet unprecedented encounter, or at the very least, if this is not random, then we are standing on the edge of a moment. Future children will study in classrooms the first contact not between two civilizations, but between one civilization and something that may lie beyond the idea of civilization. I'll The traditional scientific world is still cautious, still reluctant. But figures like Avi Loeb, Brian Cox, and independent physicists everywhere, they're beginning to ask themselves, are we analyzing a frozen rock or decrypting a message encoded in matter? Because if it truly carries intent, the frightening part is not that it is approaching, it's that it has already arrived, and we only just noticed. It all began with that blue light, the light of a new face after the sun. A reminder, the universe is not silent. We are simply not yet large enough to listen. Science never stands still. It is always a journey to find new boundaries, and sometimes that boundary is opened by an icy wanderer, or by a silent messenger drifting through the void. We don't know for sure, not yet, but as Brian Cox once whispered in a lecture about the meaning of existence, we explore because we are human and we want to know. And perhaps 3IATLAS is the next great test, to see whether humanity still longs to know as fiercely as we did in the beginning. There's a strange dissonance in the language of the cosmos, a contradiction that stands not in the distant nebulae or at the event horizon of black holes, but right here, within the blue glow of 3IATLAS, a contradiction so stark that it grips both the scientist and the philosopher in equal measure. It is the contradiction of temperature, or more precisely, the absence of it. According to the most basic principles of physics, laws so fundamental they form the skeleton of every astrophysical model, only two kinds of objects can emit blue light. The first, bodies of extreme heat, stars burning at tens of thousands of degrees Kelvin, young volatile suns shedding their energy in radiant bursts across the electromagnetic spectrum. The second, active purposeful sources, where light is not the product of heat, but of intent. Light that is engineered, not emitted. Light that exists not because something is burning, but because something is functioning. And yet, here stands 3IATLAS, or rather, here glows 3IATLAS, entirely at odds with both conditions. It is much too cold to be blue, not cold in the way a stone is cold, nor even in the way a moon shadow is cold. Cold in the cosmic sense, a frigid object barely warmed by its brief grazing encounter with the sun, a body whose peak temperature remains a fraction of what is needed to produce the high-energy photon output associated with blue wavelengths. A body that, by all observational data, shouldn't be glowing at all, yet it does. It glows not faintly, nor sporadically, but with a clarity that speaks of stability. It is not the last breath of a dying object. It is the confident pulse of something either newly awakened, or always active and simply waiting to be seen. To understand why this is not just an anomaly, but a defiance of physical law, one must look at the simplest comparison, temperature and light. At 5,000 Kelvin, a star's light becomes yellow-white. At 10,000 Kelvin, it burns pale blue-white. At 30,000 Kelvin and beyond, the realm of massive, short-lived blue stars, the light shifts fully into the blue spectrum. This is the temperature domain of violence, matter torn apart, electrons stripped from their atoms, light pouring out as if from a wound in spacetime itself. 3IATLAS is nowhere near this temperature. Instead, its surface and tail composition analysis suggests temperatures barely over 300 Kelvin, equivalent to a warm summer's day on Earth. A frozen body calmly orbiting through the void, suddenly acting as though it is a fragment of a star, not through heat, but through light alone. It is here that the elegance of Brian Cox's cosmological philosophy becomes deeply relevant. As he once reflected, physics is beautiful because it is universal, unchanging, indifferent, and ultimately true. But what happens when something appears that is not indifferent? When something glows, not because nature demands it, but because some other principle, perhaps even some other will, is at work? Science has always demanded skepticism. Yet skepticism without imagination becomes blindness. The blue of the 3IATLAS is the kind of phenomenon that forces us to admit one of two possibilities. Either the universe has found a loophole in its own laws, or we have misunderstood the nature of the object we are witnessing. Dirtes, let us consider the second possibility, the idea of a source of active emission. Light, as we know it, can be produced without heat. We do it every day. LEDs do not burn, they function. Lasers do not glow because they are hot, they glow because they are precise. Energy is not wasted, it is shaped. There's a purpose behind the glow. When we cast this idea onto 3IATLAS, we are forced to step into speculative terrain. But speculation is not the enemy of science. It is the vanguard of understanding. As Cox has famously said, curiosity is the engine of achievement. So we ask, what if 3IATLAS is not behaving like a comet because it is not a comet? What if its glow is not the residue of heat, but the echo of function? What if its blue light, so shockingly at odds with the cold, is not the signature of temperature, but of technology? This is not to claim the object is artificial, but to recognize that the pattern of light demands this question. The universe does not favor blue light. Blue is expensive, energetically and structurally. Nature only uses it sparingly, at extreme cost. So when something cold and silent, something supposed to be powerless, radiates blue, it sends a signal not through language, but through contradiction. I am not what you think I am. In classical astronomy, comets are the fossils of unfinished worlds, leftover ice and dust, preserved from the earliest days of the solar system. They are debris, relics, offcuts of creation. Timeless, yes, but passive. 3IATLAS refuses to sit inside that category. It glows as though it wants to be seen. It survives explosions as though fragility is beneath it. It moves in ways that challenge not gravity, but assumption. Is this arrogance to question? Perhaps. Or perhaps, as Cox suggests through his gentle, persistent belief in cosmic wonder, it's through exploring the unknown that we discover what the universe is and who we are. The blue of 3IATLAS is more than a color. It is a threshold, a crack in the wall between the known and the possible. Which side is truth and which side illusion? We do not yet know, but one thing is certain. The light coming from the 3IATLAS is not just visible, it is intentional. It demands a response. And in its glow, we hear not the silence of space, but the whisper of a question older than humanity itself. Are we alone, or are we merely late to the conversation? Because sometimes, the universe does not teach with answers, it teaches with impossibilities. And so, if the blue glow of 3IATLAS is already a direct challenge to everything we think we understand about temperature and light, then what comes next is something even more unsettling. Because it is not just the color of the object that defies explanation, but the very laws we thought were unbreakable. According to the foundations of thermal radiation, laws so sturdy they have underpinned astrophysics for a century, every object in the universe emits light according to its temperature. This is what Max Planck, through the birth of quantum theory, taught us, that the cosmos glows because matter has a temperature, and that this temperature strictly dictates its color. It is why the sun blazes white-yellow, why a dying ember glows orange, and why interstellar dust radiates faintly in the infrared. There is no poetry here, only mathematics, symmetry, and truth. But 3IATLAS refuses to obey. With a surface temperature barely 10% that of the sun's photosphere, just a few hundred Kelvin, the object should, under the iron rule of Planck's law, emit only in dull tones of red, deep crimson, or at most, a faint ghostly pink. Not blue, never blue. Blue is reserved for the violent, the burning, the nuclear. To see it on something so cold is like seeing frost catch fire. And in that moment, physics itself seems to tremble, not because its logic has failed, but because its assumptions have been outgrown. As Professor Brian Cox has reminded us time and time again, the problem is not that the universe is confusing. The problem is that we have assumed it should behave in ways that make sense to us. The radiance of 3IATLAS is not merely nonconformity. It is disobedience. Because let's walk this through simply. The sun's surface temperature, 5,778 Kelvin or D 3 Atlas after perihelion, Sakar 500 Kelvin. According to Wien's law, an object at 500 K should emit most of its light at around 5,800 nanometers, deep into the infrared, invisible to the naked eye. Instead, 3IATLAS emits at 450 nanometers, the domain of blue. This is not a small deviation. This is not a measurement error. This is a violation of thermal radiation itself. So what are we to make of an object that shines where it should not, glows with energy it should not possess, and projects a signature that physics itself denies? There are only three options. 1. The data is wrong, but multiple observatories confirm the same results. 2. The theory is incomplete. Possible. but Planck's law is one of the most thoroughly tested principles in the history of science. 3. The light is not being produced by heat, which means it is either a non-thermal emission or a deliberate phenomenon, a mechanism, not an accident. Suddenly, the phrase collapse of a law stops being metaphorical. It becomes diagnostic, because when the laws of physics no longer describe what we see, either nature is changed, or we are no longer observing nature alone. It is here that the voice of Brian Cox becomes not just enlightening, but necessary. Science is not about certainty. Science is about finding the most reliable way of thinking at the present level of understanding. That sentence, spoken gently, is a lighthouse. It reminds us that laws do not fail. They evolve. But evolution demands pressure. Something must push against the boundary for new knowledge to break through. 3IATLAS is that pressure, not because it kills the law of thermal radiation, but because it demands we ask whether temperature is still the only factor generating light in the cosmos. What if an object could bypass heat entirely? What if energy could be manipulated into light without temperature? What if the universe has already discovered, or built, systems that treat light not as a byproduct, but as a message? The collapse is no longer theoretical. It is present tense. Physics is not being abandoned. It is being expanded. And this is where the philosophical edge enters. We have built our understanding of the universe on the assumption that nature is indifferent, that comets do not want to be seen, that light travels but does not speak, that color is a consequence, never a choice. 3IATLAS challenges that assumption. It communicates through impossibility, just as the blue light seemed to say, I am here. The breaking of the thermal rule seems to whisper, so are you. Because if we are the universe becoming conscious of itself, as Cox has said, we are the cosmos made conscious, and life is the means by which the universe understands itself. Then perhaps 3IATLAS is life, not biological life, not carbon-based life, but conceptual life, made of motion, light, and design. Something that does not burn, but operates. Something that does not radiate, but signals. And so, when we say the law collapses, what we mean is this. The law has been outgrown. The universe is showing us a new version of itself. And the question is no longer, how is this happening? But why are we being shown this now? Because the laws of physics are not failing. They are being rewritten, one blue photon at a time. What comes next is not just a matter of observation, but of courage. Are we prepared to let go of certainty? Are we ready to explore a universe that refuses to stay within the lines we drew for it? Because sometimes, just sometimes, the universe does not speak in equations. It speaks in broken ones. And so, if the collapse of thermal law leaves us standing at the threshold of a new kind of physics, one where light is no longer merely the residue of heat, but a signal in its own right, then we must confront the boldest interpretation yet. Because when nature ceases to explain itself through law, humanity turns inevitably toward intention. It is no small thing when a respected physicist publicly questions not a detail, not a parameter, but the very origin of a cosmic phenomenon. And yet that is precisely what Professor Avi Loeb has done. Loeb, known not only for his groundbreaking work, but also for his audacity to question the unspoken taboos of astronomy, has proposed that the blue light of 3IATLAS may not be the result of natural law at all, but of engineering. Specifically, he suggests two possibilities. 1. The object is emitting artificial light, as though containing a built-in illumination device. 2. The light is the byproduct of thermal energy released by a propulsion system. In other words, a drive, not a tail. His words echo with a tone both analytical and rebellious. If it looks engineered, moves with intent, and behaves like no natural object we know, perhaps we should start asking if it is engineered. And in the hushed aftermath of that assertion, classrooms, labs, and online forums alike fell into a familiar state, silence mixed with discomfort. Because to entertain the idea that 3IATLAS might be artificial is not merely to question the physics of a comet. It is to challenge the assumption that human beings are alone in building things. To understand the gravity of Loeb's proposal, that we might be looking at a cosmic LED, an object broadcasting itself, we must revisit the most human of truths. We recognize design because we create it. When we see a pattern that is not random, a glow that is not thermal, a motion that is not gravitational, we instinctively search not for natural mechanisms, but for intent. Brian Cox once framed this tension beautifully. The universe is under no obligation to make sense to us, but that does not mean it is senseless. What if 3I-ATLAS is not senseless? What if it is not a comet that glows, but a mechanism that announces? Picture it not as ice glowing in the sun, but as circuitry humming in the dark. Picture the blue not as thermal, but as signal. A frequency not of accident, but of broadcast. Because if there exists somewhere out there a civilization capable of crossing the stars, or of sending emissaries to do so on their behalf, then the first thing they mastered would not be propulsion. It would be communication. And what is light but the oldest form of communication in the universe? Imagine, for a moment, that 3I-ATLAS is not simply seen, but meant to be seen. That its reappearance in blue after perihelion is not merely a physics violation, but a deliberate reveal. A controlled transformation, a transition signal. I am here. I have passed your sun. Now, look. If that idea is shocking, it is because the mind is always slower than the universe. As Cox reminds us gently, through all his cosmic storytelling, there's no need for the universe to align with our expectations. But there's every chance it will exceed them. But let us resist the temptation of fantasy, and instead treat this idea with the respect it deserves. What evidence supports the notion of artificiality? Non-thermal emission, a stable blue spectrum inconsistent with the object's temperature. Unusual composition. Nickel without iron, addressed later in detail. Non-gravitational acceleration, documented by NASA with no evaporation residue. Quasi-stable luminosity, no dimming despite solar interaction. Coherent structural integrity, even after explosive perihelion passage. If this were a spacecraft or a probe, it would behave exactly like this. Tough, persistent, self-illuminating, navigationally independent, not broadcasting heat, but data, not signaling life, but presence. Of course, the question then is not, is this possible? Because in a universe 93 billion light-years wide, possibility is a matter of scale, not imagination. The question is, how do we respond if it's true? If 3I-ATLAS is artificial, then the blue light is not aberration, but invitation, a call outward or inward, a message not made of words, but of physics itself. And what if that message is not to humanity, but to someone, or something else? What if 3I-ATLAS is not searching for us, but waiting to be found by others, a beacon in deep time, unbothered by our sudden awareness? Such speculation, unsettling yet exhilarating, does not mark an end to science. It marks its expansion. And that, too, aligns with the voice of Brian Cox. We explore not because we must, but because we can. Because curiosity is the signature of consciousness. If 3I-ATLAS bears the touch of engineering, then we are not merely observers of a comet, but witnesses to the arrival of another kind of curiosity. A curiosity older than ours, colder than ours, and perhaps wiser than ours. How was some Zijeko in that blue glow? Perhaps the real question is not, is it a machine? But are we ready for what it means if it is? Because sometimes the question that breaks the silence of the stars is not the one we ask, but the one we are asked. And in that sense, 3I-ATLAS may be less a comet and more a mirror. And if the idea of an engineered light source aboard 3I-ATLAS raises the possibility of design, then what comes next drags that possibility out of the shadows. Because light may deceive the eye, but chemistry never lies. In the cosmos, patterns are everything. Gravity forms them. Time preserves them. Chemistry obeys them. And among those patterns, one of the most reliable is this. Nickel and iron are inseparable companions. Together, they forge the cores of planets. They drift in meteoroids. They coalesce in the fiery hearts of supernovae. Wherever nickel is formed in astrophysical processes, iron is born beside it, not as a coincidence, but as a requirement of nuclear fusion. And yet, observations taken independently from the Keck Observatory, the Very Large Telescope, and the Atacama Array reveal something so unlikely it borders on the deliberate. 3I-ATLAS is emitting pure nickel at a rate of 4 grams per second, yet nearly no iron at all. Those 4 grams each second drifting into the void like silver dust represent far more than a compositional anomaly. They represent a break in cosmic habit. They are the fingerprint of something, or someone, interfering with the rules. There's no known natural process in the universe that can separate nickel from iron so cleanly, so consistently, and at this scale. To understand the magnitude of this anomaly, consider how elements are formed. Nickel and iron are both end products of stellar nucleosynthesis, the final stages of a star's life, when hydrogen fuses into helium, helium into carbon, and onward, until the star collapses in a supernova. In nearly all such explosions, iron, Fe, and nickel, Ni, emerge together in ratios governed by nuclear stability, a harmony built into the fabric of nuclear force. So when we find nickel and no iron, we are not seeing a rare outcome, we are seeing an unnatural one. But suppose we take nature out of the equation. Suppose we consider intention. Pure nickel, especially nickel tetracarbonyl, is a highly useful material in advanced engineering. It is resistant to corrosion, structurally versatile, and central to certain types of thermal shielding. In fact, in human industry, nickel is most frequently purified for use in alloys and high-performance machinery. But out in deep space, purification of this kind does not happen unless it is done. As Professor Brian Cox has often noted, the universe produces complexity only reluctantly and never accidentally. Pure nickel without iron is not just rare. It is industrial. It is the signature of refinement, of separation, of processing. The cosmos does not refine metals. Civilizations do. Let us imagine, then, that what we are witnessing is not a tail, but a waste stream, not debris, but exhaust, not decay, but output. 4 grams per second is not much by human standards, about the weight of 2 paper clips. But in cosmic terms, where time flows like an ocean, it is staggering. A single Earth day of this rate produces over 300 kilograms of purified nickel. A year yields nearly 120 metric tons. But what matters is not the amount, it is the nature of the act. 3IATLAS is doing work, and that work is refining. Deshtarish, to those who resist such conclusions, who cling to naturalism as a shield, we must recall the wisdom of science's most poetic defenders. Curiosity is the engine of achievement. Brian Cox. Curiosity refuses to ignore the impossible. Curiosity follows the pattern until the pattern breaks. If nickel without iron is not from nature, then it is from process. If 3IATLAS is not a comet, then perhaps it is a factory disguised as one. Or worse, not disguised at all. For those asking, why nickel? The answer points back to thermodynamics and engineering. Nickel-based alloys are essential in high-performance machinery, radiation shielding, energy containment structures, energy, extreme thermal environments, advanced propulsion systems, in other words. In the construction of spacecraft, reactors, or large-scale industrial vessels. Even at human levels of technology, nickel is a strategic metal. On a cosmic scale, it may be a post-stellar resource, mined, purified, and used not by civilizations living on planets, but by civilizations traveling between them. So when 3IATLAS sprays nickel into the void, it is not a comet shedding ice. It may be a machine shedding its history, not breaking apart, but discarding what it has already used. And this leads us to a haunting, irresistible question. What if 3IATLAS is not a visitor at all, but a vehicle, a vessel of unknown purpose, gathering, refining, a silent refinery, slipping through the dark between stars? We are not simply watching a celestial event. We may be watching industrial archaeology in real time. And as Brian Cox has said, with a voice equal parts wonder and warning, the most profound discovery would not be that we are unique, but that we are ordinary. Because if this, the purity of nickel, the absence of iron, the stability of light, is ordinary somewhere out there, then existence itself is about to change. Not because we have found someone, but because we have found their work. Sometimes the universe does not tell us, you are not alone. Instead, it shows us, someone has already been here. And if the unusual purity of nickel in 3IATLAS suggests we are not witnessing a natural occurrence, but a process, Then the next step is to accept a possibility even more profound. What if the universe itself contains factories, not of stars and planets, but of purpose and construction? Nickel tetracarbonyl. A phrase that would barely register outside a chemistry lab. A colorless, volatile, highly toxic compound. Formed on Earth not by geologic chance, not by volcanic vents or stellar debris, but by industrial metallurgy. It is the byproduct of process, of extraction, of intelligence. And yet, in the spectral readings taken from 3IATLAS, signals consistent with this very compound, or its purified nickel counterpart, have been repeatedly detected. Not in trace, but in stream. A stream emerging from a body supposedly formed in the chaotic womb of an interstellar nursery. This is not just improbable, it is, in natural terms, impossible. Nowhere in known astrophysics do we observe nickel, separated from iron in such a refined form. Nowhere in cosmic chemistry do we see industrial-grade compounds emerging from cometary tails. Nowhere in the wild expanse of ungoverned stellar matter do we see metallurgical precision. Unless, of course, precision is the point. Let us ask a question, not as scientists or skeptics, but as people who understand the nature of intent. What does it mean for a comet to exhibit the byproducts of industry? It means the same thing it means on Earth when we see nitrogen dioxide in the sky, that something is working, not naturally, not geologically, but mechanically. Nickel tetracarbonyl is not a geological accident. It is the fingerprint of refining. In human hands, it is used for purification of metals, electroplating advanced components, fabrication of precision alloys, design of ultra-resistant machinery. It is not a material one stumbles upon. It is a material one creates through chemistry, heat, and design. Which brings us to the haunting core of this idea. Why is an industrial compound being ejected into space from an object once dismissed as a comet? Perhaps it is time to shift perspective. Perhaps 3IATLAS is not a fragment of the universe. Perhaps it is a tool of the universe. Or even more daringly, a tool of someone in it. If this is not a comet, but a craft, then the metal in its wake is not debris, but residue, evidence not of chaos, but of function. And that aligns eerily with a deeper, older idea, that intelligence is not limited to biology, that civilizations might evolve not to inhabit planets, but to utilize them, to harvest stars, to build an orbit, to mine in silence across the empty gulfs of time. As Brian Cox himself often reflects, life is rare and precious, not because the universe is barren, but because complexity is costly. And complexity is on full display here, not in the richness of molecules, but in their separation. In science, whenever we see order where there should be chaos, we suspect design. Whenever we see precision where there should be randomness, we suspect purpose. And when we see industry, metal without ore, output without collapse, we suspect a factory, even if that factory is not made of walls and workers, but of silent engines drifting between stars. Consider how human civilization might look from afar, not in who we are, but in what we leave behind. Aluminum in the air, plastics in the sea, CO2 in the atmosphere, refined metals in our machines. Future watchers of Earth would not need to see humans to know we existed. They would need only to read our waste. What then does the waste of 3IATLAS tell us? That it moves, that it builds, that it processes, and that it does not need to hide. Perhaps we are not witnessing a signal, but a side effect. Let us take this one step further. If 3IATLAS is an industrial object, then what we are witnessing is not communication, but activity, not a message, a routine. Perhaps it is harvesting, processing, building. The cosmos is not static. It is a workshop, a laboratory, a place of constant transformation. But until now, we believed only nature played that role. Stars forged elements, gravity, sculpted matter, time refined complexity. But what if there are others, somewhere out there, who have taken up where nature left off? Who do not wait for stars to die, but instead forge their own elements? What if the universe is not a desert, but a network, its factories unlit, unvisited, and unimagined? Until now. And as we let that idea settle, we return once more to the voice of Cox, not with certainty, but with humility. Science is the greatest story ever told, not because it gives us answers, but because it teaches us how much there is left to learn. Perhaps 3IATLAS is not here to reveal itself to us. Perhaps it is here to reveal our limit, to show us that intelligence, like gravity, is not unique to Earth, that industry, like evolution, is not owned by biology, and that purpose, like metal, is forged, not found. If the universe is a factory, then we have just discovered our first blueprint, not for how to understand it, but for how to grow into it. And if the traces of industry embedded in 3IATLAS have already forced us to reconsider what qualifies as natural, then the next observation takes us even further, because it challenges not just chemistry or material science, but the very force that shapes the motion of everything in the universe, gravity. For centuries, gravity has been the great choreographer of the cosmos. Planets curve because of it, comets dance because of it, stars collapse beneath the weight of it, galaxies spin around its invisible thread, and in its quiet assurance, we have found comfort, because gravity is predictable, it is impartial, it is universal. But then came the data from NASA, and with it, the disturbance of that cosmic order. According to a technical report released quietly, almost reluctantly, 3IATLAS is accelerating, and not in ways consistent with gravity, solar radiation pressure, gas outflow, or any known natural mechanism. In fact, the object shows dual-axis acceleration, moving in two separate vectors that do not align with either its previous trajectory or with any heat-based sublimation model. It is as though the object is not falling through space, but steering. NASA's own technical assessment states, observed delta V cannot be explained by mass loss, solar heating, gravity wells, or outgassing effect. That single sentence, buried in a report few will ever read, is one of the most radical admissions in the history of space science. 3IATLAS is moving in a way that defies physics unless something's piloting it. Let's break this down in simple terms. Comets accelerate when they eject gas or ice near stars, like steam from a kettle. That expulsion causes a recoil, altering their speed or spin. But this requires visible mass loss, and in large amounts. Yet 3IATLAS shows zero visible fragmentation, no visible gas jets, no mass shedding, and no sign of thermal activity. It moves, but it does not break. It accelerates, but it does not evaporate. It changes trajectory, but leaves no debris. Even more astonishing, the amount of force required for its observed motion exceeds the possible thrust from sublimation by a factor of 20. Meaning, if the motion were caused by melting ice, 3IATLAS would have needed to lose 15% of its total mass already. And yet, it remains intact, unified, whole. What does that suggest? That whatever's generating this force is internal, not passive, purposeful, not incidental. When physicists are forced to describe an object as having independent motion, there aren't many words left in the scientific vocabulary, except the one that carries all the weight of taboo, self-propelled. But the universe does not care about taboos. It does not care about human discomfort. And neither did the NASA data analyst who wrote the following line. Observed motion implies the presence of external thrust or internal energy utilization. This is not speculation. This is documentation. Once again, we turn to the poetic anchor of Brian Cox, who so often reminds us that the universe is neither hostile nor friendly, but the universe is not trying to trick us. But it is not obliged to be simple either. We tend to assume comets move because they must. What if this one moves because it chooses? What if its path is not celestial, but deliberate? And what if the reason we can't explain its motion is because we're applying the wrong kind of physics to the wrong kind of object? Gravity is universal, but autonomy? That is something else entirely. If 3IATLAS is accelerating with intent, then that intent is not random. It is spatial. It is directed. It has destination. What would it mean if we are not watching a comet plunge toward the sun, but a craft navigating through our star? What would it mean if it is not a passenger of gravity, but a captain of its own momentum? What if, In all our centuries of observing the heavens, we are finally seeing something the laws of nature didn't write. And what if it is watching back? In science, the most dangerous assumption is always this. We already understand it. Mbebita. But as Cox has said, with wit and gravity, the real tragedy of life is not that it ends, but that we wait so long to begin it. Perhaps 3I Atlas is not here to end anything, but to begin something. Something that requires us to accept that not everything in the universe falls. Some things fly, and if the movement of 3I Atlas no longer obeys gravity, and its acceleration cannot be explained by sublimation or solar outgassing, then we arrive at a question so bold that it divides the scientific mind in two. Is this a natural body being eroded by the sun, or something equipped with an engine? In the cosmic language of comets, motion is always a negotiation with heat. A comet approaches the sun. Its ice is warm. Outgassing begins. The recoil from escaping gas, tiny but constant, propels it ever so slightly off course. To the untrained eye, this may seem like control. To the astrophysicist, it is inevitable chemistry. But what if the chemistry isn't there? This is the question raised by 3I Atlas, and it is a question that will not stop ringing. In conventional comet science, when a body accelerates without propulsion, mass loss is the answer. The comet releases gas and dust. The gas jets act like thrusters, albeit primitive ones. Physics is satisfied. But here, physics is not satisfied, because the math is unforgiving. To achieve the level of non-gravitational thrust observed in 3I Atlas, the object would need to lose up to 15% of its total mass. That is millions, if not billions, of tons of material. And yet, 3I Atlas remains whole. No tail expansion, no cloud of debris, no fade in visual magnitude, no visible jets or fractures. It is unchanged, it is unbroken, it is intact. There's no erosion and no explanation, unless we are not looking at erosion at all, but propulsion. Bequerrer shouting this is the threshold where many scientists grow quiet, because the word engine is not a scientific term. It is a human one. It implies design, it implies machinery, it implies intelligence. But nature does not build engines. It builds orbits, tides, impacts, eruptions, not control systems. And yet, 3I Atlas moves as though it can decide. Its acceleration is not random or chaotic, as you might expect from sublimation. It is smooth, it is linear, it is guided, and perhaps most damning, it is repeatable. In multiple scans, from multiple angles, across multiple days. To explain this with evaporation alone is like explaining a drone's flight path by wind patterns. It is not impossible, but it is absurd. Here is what makes this even more remarkable. The internal energy needed to create the acceleration observed would be enormous, not just in magnitude, but in consistency. There's no sign of fluctuation, no thermal spike, no rotational torque variation. Even if this were a massive gas jet hidden beneath the surface, the instability would be unmistakable. But there is no instability, only continuity. That is not chemical burn. That is sustained output. That is not chance. That is system. And in this moment, we are forced to ask the most uncomfortable question of all. If this is not an engine, then why does it behave more like one than anything else we have seen in space? Humanity has built engines, countless kinds, from steam turbines to ion drives, but all of them, even the most advanced, burn or eject something. Fuel is spent, mass decreases. But what if an engine existed that did not shed? What if thrust could be applied without mass loss? What if motion could be created without chemical fire? Then, what we are seeing would make sense. The universe doesn't owe us engines we understand. Perhaps 3I Atlas doesn't burn. Perhaps it converts. Perhaps it steals energy from the sun not to die, but to drive. Imagine, for a moment, a technology millions of years beyond us. Would it burn rockets or bend space? Would it carry fuel tanks or harvest radiation? Would it show scars of movement or glide without a scar to be seen? It is here that Brian Cox's view of cosmic humility becomes unavoidable. The universe was not made for us, but that does not mean it is beyond us. The question is no longer, is this an engine? But how primitive are our engines, if this is not? So, where does this leave us? We look at 3IATLAS, and we see acceleration without fuel loss, trajectory changes without gravity, no thermal plume, no visible exhaust, no fragmentation, no fading mass. These are not the fingerprints of melting ice. They are the fingerprints of confidence, the kind of confidence possessed by an object that doesn't fear the sun, but uses it. There is a name in aerospace for the kind of motion we are describing: powered flight. And powered flight in the vacuum of space requires one of two things. One, a physical force acting against nothing through mass expulsion. 2, a manipulation of space-time itself through energy application. Option 1 is ruled out, which means option 2 is no longer fiction. If 3IATLAS is using energy to interact with space, not gas, not heat, then we are not witnessing propulsion. We are witnessing technology. This realization is not comfortable, it is not welcome, but it is necessary. Because as Cox reminds us, science is not there to make us feel safe. It is there to make us feel real. And this feels real, perhaps too real. Because what do we do with the knowledge that something out there, something not from Earth, is moving with mastery? Not over distance, but over physics itself. So we end with the question that no scientist ever wants to ask, and no theorist ever wants to dismiss. Is 3IATLAS melting? Or is it moving? And if it is moving, what is it moving toward? And if 3IATLAS is not burning, but moving, not eroding, but accelerating, then we must confront the next question with clarity and courage. What kind of object follows a path that seems less like coincidence and more like intention? In cosmic mechanics, the trajectory of a natural object is one of the most predictable things in the universe. Gravity sets the rules, mass follows them. Whether you're a dust particle or a gas giant, your path through the cosmos is written in the equations of physics, silent, elegant, inescapable. But 3IATLAS is not obeying, or rather, it is obeying something else. Let us begin with a simple fact, recorded by NASA, ESA, and several independent observatories. 3IATLAS is traveling almost perfectly within the ecliptic plane, the same plane occupied by all major planets in the solar system. It is not arcing at odd angles like Oumuamua did in 2017. It is not plunging through orbital gradients like a rogue body torn from some cosmic collision. Instead, it is gliding in a manner so orderly that its path resembles not a comet, but a survey. Imagine throwing a stone into space from another star. The chances that it will happen to slide neatly into the same flat disk where Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn spin like coins are vanishingly small. 1 in a billion, or worse. And yet, here this object is, not cutting across the solar system, not falling through it, but moving with it, as though following a path that was not random, but selected. Rime off of trajectory analysis shows even more. Its incoming angle is shallow, not plunging. Its orbital plane aligns within fractions of a degree with planetary orbits. Its perihelion distance from the sun, is mild. Its motion is steady, not chaotic. In other words, 3IATLAS behaves like an object that wants to blend into the cosmic architecture, not disrupt it, not crash through it, but navigate it. To comprehend how unlikely this is, consider this. If you were standing outside the solar system and wanted to enter it quietly, as one would enter a foreign city, what path would you take? You wouldn't dive straight toward the sun. You wouldn't slingshot in steep arcs like comets frozen in chaotic birth. You would choose the ecliptic, the highway of worlds, the same plane where gravitational balance is cleanest, where observation is easiest, where any surveillance of planets or contact would be most efficient. And 3IATLAS has taken it, not once, but continuously. Even after perihelion, when gravity, spin forces, and thermal forces typically send comets into irregular tumbling. 3IATLAS did not tumble. It stayed the course, a course that looks less like a natural fling through space and more like a planned traversal. This is why Avi Loeb, in a rare public challenge to mainstream astronomy, stated, "You don't get alignment with planetary planes by chance. You get it by design, if not of the object, then of its journey." If this were a spacecraft, it would do exactly this. Enter the solar system on the ecliptic, match its plane with the planets, pass near the sun to gather energy or scan its gravity. Exit without collision, maintain an unobtrusive profile. To do this naturally is like shuffling every deck of cards on Earth and pulling out a royal flush every single time. And yet, some in the scientific community refuse to entertain the possibility that trajectory can have meaning, as though intention cannot exist outside of Earth. Here, Brian Cox's philosophy becomes a needed corrective. We are part of a universe that is older, larger, and stranger than we ever imagined. The most dangerous assumption we can make is that we are its only storytellers. Perhaps 3IATLAS is not a story of chaos. Perhaps it is not a lost child of interstellar dust. Perhaps it is a route, a message not of words, but of position, a geometry that says, "We know your layout, we respect your architecture, we move with you." Now, to call something manufactured is not always to claim it was built. Sometimes it is to say, it behaves as though someone cared how it behaved. Trajectory is not just about arrival, it is about intention. And in 3IATLAS we see a path that mimics planetary order, a velocity shaped by non-gravitational force, a return angle too precise to dismiss, a sustained orbit that suggests navigation, not fall. We are not watching a comet fly by. We are watching a course being held, a course not random, but intelligent. How mysteriously? So we ask, not as scientists alone, but as humans. If this is not a natural trajectory, then whose is it? And more deeply, why does it follow ours? And if the trajectory of 3IATLAS already pushes the boundaries of what we call coincidence, then what comes next doesn't just challenge statistical probability, it annihilates it. Because we are no longer dealing with one anomaly, but 9. And together, they form a pattern so unlikely, it forces us to reconsider whether we are looking at chaos or choreography. In science, anomalies are the cracks in the surface of certainty. A single anomaly, if persistent, can rewrite textbooks. But 9? 9 anomalies in one single object? That is not a crack. That is a fracture in the very idea of randomness. Professor Avi Loeb has laid them out one by one, and each, on its own, would be enough to raise questions. But together, they form a symmetry of improbability that forces one conclusion. 3IATLAS is not behaving like a natural object should. Let us list these 9 anomalies, not as speculation, but as a record of observation. 1. Blue spectral emission, despite being too cold to emit blue light. 2. Pure nickel ejection, without iron, defying nucleosynthesis. 3. Non-gravitational acceleration, without mass loss. 4. Stable structure, despite explosive perihelion passage. 5. Ecliptic plane trajectory, matching planetary orbits. 6. Dual-axis motion shift, inconsistent with sublimation. 7. Consistent luminosity, post-perihelion, no dimming or fragmentation. 8. Absence of thermal jets, no outgassing signature found. 9. Lack of rotational variance. Spin does not change despite acceleration. Each of these is a mystery. Together, they are a message. And when Loeb calculated the probability of all 9 occurring naturally, the result was 1 in 10,000, 1 in 10 quadrillion. To put that in perspective, you are more likely to be hit by lightning 7 times in a row. Win the lottery on every ticket you buy in a lifetime. Flip a coin and get heads 50 times consecutively. Even in a universe filled with chaos, some patterns are so crisp, they cannot be dismissed. They must be acknowledged. Some scientists resist this, not because the data is disputed, but because the conclusion is uncomfortable. To admit the pattern is to admit, even entertain, the possibility that we are no longer looking at a comet, but a technology. And that shifts everything, because where there is technology, there is a technologist. Where there is design, there is a designer. Where there is intention, there is intelligence. This is where the voice of Brian Cox becomes more than a reflection. It becomes a mirror. The universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. 9 anomalies. 1 improbable object. A probability so absurd that randomness feels like an excuse. So what do we call something that moves with control, emits with purpose, endures stress, projects light, and contains refined industrial material? We don't call it a comet. We call it a question. What are Basane? Let us be clear. This is not about proving alien life. This is about intellectual honesty. If we encountered such an object in Earth orbit, we wouldn't say probably a space rock. We would say, who built that? If we found it on the moon, we'd send a crew. If we saw it rise from the sea, we'd scramble every sensor on Earth. But because it comes from the stars, we hesitate. Why? Because its implications unsettle our most fragile belief, that we are alone. Because it is here that science faces its truest test, not of knowledge, but of courage. Because as Brian Cox reminds us, the true enemy of science is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. Perhaps the 9 anomalies of 3IATLAS exist not to shock us, but to wake us, because somewhere in the deep silence of space, something may be moving, not as a rock drifts, but as a mind travels, and if that is true, we are not at the end of a mystery, we are at the beginning of an era. And if 9 cascading anomalies were not enough to bend the arc of possibility toward intention, then what comes next ties the present to the past. A whispered echo from deep space, speaking across half a century. Because somewhere in this story, 3IATLAS does not just defy physics, it answers a question we asked 50 years ago and never solved. On August 15th, 1977, a radio telescope in Ohio picked up what is still considered the most extraordinary signal in the history of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. It lasted for 72 seconds. It came from deep space. It matched no human frequency. It never repeated. The astronomer who spotted it circled the data printout and wrote beside it, in red ink, "Wow." For nearly half a century, the wow signal was discussed, dismissed, debated, and ultimately archived. No code was cracked, no pattern was found, no source was confirmed. Until now. Because as 3IATLAS entered the solar system, its inbound trajectory was traced, not just its path through space, but its origin point. And what astronomers discovered was not merely curious, it was historical. 3IATLAS comes from the exact region of sky where the WOW signal was detected, not adjacent, not approximate, a line. The object now inside our heliosphere, the same object emitting unnatural nickel signatures, accelerating of its own volition, glowing with impossible blue, comes from the same place the most famous unexplainable message in SETI history was heard. Coincidence? Or continuity? This discovery forced many scientists to ask a question they had once dismissed. Was the WOW signal not a message, but a marker? Not a hello, but a heads up. Not the voice of a civilization, but the ping of a moving object. The WOW signal lasted 72 seconds because the source moved. It crossed the telescope's focus before we realized what we were listening to. And what if that source is now here? What if this was not a letter, but a flight plan? A map across time, not communication across space. What Brian Cox once said, every atom in our bodies was forged in the heart of a star. We are, literally, the universe becoming aware of itself. But what if we are not the only awareness? What if something else, something older, quieter, and more patient, has been traveling through the cosmos with purpose? The WOW signal was not random. It was not noise. It was a footprint. And 3IATLAS, arriving 50 years later, may be the traveler who left it. Let us consider the possibility. 1977, we receive a brief, precise spike in the hydrogen line, the most universal broadcast frequency in the universe. 2025, an interstellar object enters our system from the same region of space, carrying 9 physical anomalies, industrial materials, and apparent control. 2 events, separated by 5 decades, but linked by direction. If a species wanted to announce its presence while keeping distance, it would not send a voice. It would send motion. a signal that is not spoken, but seen. Shab wonder perhaps the wow signal was not meant for that moment. Perhaps it was a timestamp, a time capsule, a cosmic version of a "we're coming, watch the stars," which raises an unsettling but essential question. What if 3IATLAS is not an answer, but a continuation? What if the wow signal was hello and 3IATLAS is arrival? What if we are not witnessing the first alien contact, but the second phase of one we never understood? Tioin, but some might say this is too speculative, too human, too narrative, but the universe has always been narrative. It moves in arcs, it builds in cycles, it speaks in time. As Cox reminds us, we are a way for the cosmos to know itself, but that does not mean we are the only way. If a message was sent, it may not have been meant for our ears. It may have been meant for our instruments. Not for our philosophy, but for our math, because the truth of the wow signal has always been this. It was not a sentence. It was a signature, and signatures are followed by presence. So where does that leave us? Facing the possibility that we were contacted 50 years ago. We did not recognize the purpose. And now the one who called has crossed our threshold. Perhaps a defiant atlas is not asking us a question. Perhaps it is waiting for us to ask one, are you the one who sent the signal? And perhaps, in that silence between past and future, the cosmos is listening for our reply. And if the wow signal connected 3IATLAS to a 50-year-old mystery, then what comes next weighs even heavier. Not in theory, not in cosmic poetry, but in the quiet authority of someone who has seen the inside of the machine. Because sometimes the most important voice is not the loudest scientist, but the engineer who knows how things are built. Not all anomalies are decoded in data rooms or telescopes. Some are understood in workshops, in labs, in silence. That is what makes the anonymous note from a retired NASA engineer so striking. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is familiar. Not the voice of speculation, but of recognition. The note was simple, clear, and damning. Nickel doesn't show up without iron in nature, only in refineries. In that single sentence, built not on guesswork, but on decades of material science, the engineer articulated what many scientists were reluctant to say. 3IATLAS is not behaving like a natural object. It is behaving like something manufactured. As Fazwarish, let us step for a moment into the mind of an engineer, not a dreamer of theories, but a builder of things. To separate nickel from iron takes heat, time, and structure. To do it in space takes even more: containment, energy, and precision. To maintain it while traveling requires system integrity. To emit it steadily in micrograms per second is not chemical chaos. It is calibrated flow. Engineers recognize intention. They know the difference between fracture and pattern. So when this NASA insider says, this is industrial, this is processed, it hits not as poetry, but as diagnosis. This is where Brian Cox's sense of cosmic humility merges with hard science. The universe is not obliged to conform to our expectations, but it often rewards our curiosity. Here, that curiosity must be directed not at stars or equations, but at metallurgy. Because if 3IATLAS is refining metal, then it is carrying out a function. And where there is function, there is purpose. What purpose? That depends not on who you ask, but when you ask. Because for those who build things, ships, satellites, spacecraft, the trace elements of structure are as revealing as fingerprints. And the fingerprint of 3IATLAS is not of nature. It is of industry. The engineer's note continues. There's no way to explain that nickel without assuming someone is producing it, unless you believe comets have factories inside them. What if that isn't sarcasm? What if that is revelation? We are used to thinking of alien intelligence as biology, as life. Wow, but what if we must extend that definition? What if a refinery can be life? What if industry is the organism? What if purpose, not carbon, is the signature of intelligence? As Cox has reminded us, life is not defined by the shape of its body, but by the scale of its complexity. If that is true, then industry is a form of intelligence made visible, whether it walks or flies, or drifts silently through star systems, shedding nickel like breadcrumbs. But there is a deeper implication here. If this object is processing metal, it is using energy, not passively, not chaotically. Which means it has internal structure, it has external function. It is either autonomy or programming. It was created. Not born engineers do not theorize in poetry. They calculate. They reverse engineer. They observe unspoken logic. And one logic stands out. You do not refine nickel in space unless it is meant for something. Not for beauty, not for spectacle, but for use. Ejects, so what could that use be? Perhaps 3IATLAS is producing plating for shielding, feeding materials into an internal build process, manufacturing components we cannot detect, or purging byproduct from a system we have no name for. Perhaps we are not watching a comet die, but a machine maintain. And if so, that maintenance has been ongoing for centuries. Because you do not drift at interstellar speeds by accident, you drift for a reason, and you refine en route. We have always believed that advanced civilizations would come looking for us, with voices, with ships, with intention. But what if they do not care whether we see them? What if they are not here for us? What if we are observing not communication, but logistics, a supply chain not meant to impress, only to persist? If that is true, then 3IATLAS may not be a visitor. It may be a vessel on its own timeline, one that predates us by millions of years. And so we return to the central question, whispered decades ago in labs and observatories. If we ever found alien technology, would we even recognize it? Thanks to one NASA engineer, the answer may be yes, but only if we look for the work, not the worker. Because in the end, the universe does not need to send a voice when it can send a tool. And if the NASA engineer's note has already cracked open the possibility of manufacturing in space, then what comes next pushes that possibility beyond suggestion and into confrontation. Because at some point, we must stop asking whether 3IATLAS behaves like a comet and start asking the only question that truly matters. Is this a comet at all? Or is it a ship? There's a moment in every investigation, scientific, philosophical, forensic, when the weight of evidence reaches a tipping point, where the hypothesis we prefer collapses under the one we fear, where the logical path demands that we step across lines we did not draw, into territory we did not choose. 3IATLAS forces us into that moment. Up to now, the object has given us non-gravitational acceleration without mass loss, metallic ejections inconsistent with natural bodies, blue light emission without corresponding heat, a trajectory aligned with planetary orbits, structural resilience through explosive perihelion. It acts like no comet. It behaves like no asteroid. And yet, to call it a ship feels sacrilegious, not to science, but to our own fear of being wrong. But as Brian Cox has famously said, the beauty of science is that it demands to be proven wrong, and often is. In that spirit, let us treat both possibilities with equal curiosity. The hypothesis 1. It is a comet. A comet is 2. A chunk of ice and dust, usually no more than 1 to 10 kilometers across, formed from leftover materials in star systems, heated into activity by proximity to stars, prone to fragmentation, outgassing, rotational instability, and yes, 3IATLAS is approximately 5 kilometers in diameter, and yes, it comes from outside the solar system, as a comet might. But that is where conformity dies. A comet does not emit pure nickel, change velocity without shedding mass, hide its outgassing signatures, retain full structural integrity after thermal stress, persist in reflective luminosity, not tied to heat, travel through the solar system with plane alignment accuracy to within 0.1 Röntgen, resist gravitational perturbation during perihelion. A comet might surprise physics once. 3IATLAS breaks physics 9 times in a row. There's no known comet behavior that explains its motion. There's no ice tail, no irregular spin, no sublimation fans, no decay. It is colder than a comet should be, stronger than a comet should be, and stranger than a comet has any right to be. If it is a comet, then comets are not what we think they are. Hypothesis 2. It is a ship. This does not mean a vessel with windows and antennas, nor a craft shaped like a saucer. We must escape fiction for a moment and consider something more humbling. If an alien civilization built something to travel between star systems, how would we recognize it? Perhaps it would not send signals. Perhaps it would not communicate. Perhaps it would be autonomous, silent, durable, non-biological, self-repairing, non-thermal in glow, industrial in composition. Powered by physics we have not yet mastered, such a thing would not look like our Voyager probes. It would not need thrust nozzles or solar sails. It would not need to speak. It would only need to endure. Something the size of 5 kilometers across and weighing 33 billion tons, as Loeb has noted, could house internal systems, carry long-term power cores, store raw materials, maintain stable motion through gravitational fields, serve as a habitat or autonomous survey vessel. And here's the haunting parallel. That is what 3IATLAS looks like. Not because it is beautiful, but because it is functional. Not because it was built with us in mind, but because it was built to survive space itself. And Brian Cox often reminds us that life and intelligence may not resemble us. If we meet other minds, they will not think as we do, nor build as we do, but they will have built. That is the crux. The inference here is not about extravagance. It is about pattern. The Comet model breaks. The ship model holds. So what do? We apply what Cox says is every scientist's responsibility. To let the data speak, even when it tells us a story we do not yet understand. Perhaps the true question is not, is it a ship? But can we prove it is not? We cannot. And that matters, because every physical feature of 3IATLAS that defies cometology fits neatly into engineering. Its resilience is structural, its motion is programmed, its composition is processed, its alignment is navigational, its luminosity is active, its trajectory is chosen. Even its silence feels intentional, the restraint of something that does not fear being found. We are used to believing alien intelligence will announce itself. But what if the point is not to be noticed? What if the point is to move through star systems without interference? What if intelligence is not social, but operational? The picture, for a moment, something ancient, not in years, but in purpose, sent off millions of years before Earth had cities, crossing interstellar space with more patience than any living species could endure, harvesting, refining, drifting, updating nothing, needing nothing, not a message, not a threat, not a beacon, just presence, a thing made to go, a machine without a master, a ship without a crew, a mission without an end. So we return to the threshold. What is 3IATLAS? A comet that behaves like a ship, or a ship that looks like a comet? If we cannot deny the latter, then we must accept that it is time to retire the former. As Brian Cox once said about our place in the universe, we are just one way for matter to think about itself. We may not be the only way. Perhaps 3IATLAS is a reminder that in the story of the cosmos, humanity is not the final chapter, only the latest one. And if the question of whether 3IATLAS is a comet or a craft already places us at the frontier of scientific and existential reckoning, then what follows next is even more provocative. Not for what it reveals, but for what is withheld. Because in the age of open data and instantaneous access, silence becomes its own kind of signal. Silence is unusual in science. Silence is against protocol. Silence is the opposite of curiosity. And yet, in the weeks following 3IATLAS's perihelion passage, as the object stabilized its path and continued emitting impossible signatures, NASA, the world's most watched and funded space agency, fell oddly, deeply quiet. This is not the silence of apathy. It is the precision of restraint. Because NASA has the data. We know this for one reason alone. In late October 2025, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO, currently in orbit around Mars, came within 30 million kilometers of 3IATLAS. That's closer than Earth is to Mars during opposition. An MRO took photographs. High-resolution, active scanning, full-spectrum photographs. We were promised the data in early November. It was never released. When pressed for comment, the NASA press office provided a one-sentence explanation. Due to the ongoing government shutdown, the release of non-essential observational data is temporarily paused. Non-essential. A 5-kilometer object of unknown origin accelerating under unexplained forces, showing signs of industrial material and unheard-of spectral emissions. Non-essential. This is where the silence becomes visible. NASA is not shrugging, NASA is waiting. Waiting for what? We can't know, but we can infer. Esperadely. Let's break this down. The data exists. The object is unprecedented. The trajectory is calculated. The imaging is complete. The object passed Perihelion. The world's most advanced Mars-based probe captured it. And yet, no pictures, no spectroscopy, no position logs, no press release. This is not how NASA behaves, unless NASA is no longer in control. Silence does not come from confusion. It comes from deliberation. As Professor Brian Cox has observed, science is not a democracy, but it does require honesty, especially when the truth is uncomfortable. Is it possible that NASA knows more than it is saying? Yes. Is it possible that NASA does not yet know how to say it? Even more likely. Consider what this moment represents. If 3IATLAS is confirmed to be not natural, NASA has two options. 1. Release the truth and rewrite humanity's place in the universe. 2. Wait, and make sure they control the revelation. Government space agencies are not built for existential shocks. They are built for policy, and policy hates uncertainty. So when the images stay unreleased, when the analyst reports remain redacted, when the conversation shifts from public to classified, it tells us something vital. This is not a scientific delay. It is a political one. This silence is not new. It echoes Challenger. It echoes UAP reports. It echoes the decades-long unwillingness to openly investigate the WOW. Signal. NASA is not lying. NASA is pausing. And pauses have weight. Because what if the images show something we are unprepared to classify? A smooth surface, geometric symmetry, metallic lattice, emissions consistent with directed energy? Or worst, structural coherence that defies geological formation? One photograph could undo decades of educational certainty. One thermal scan could break the boundary between natural and designed. As Cox puts it, when we finally find evidence of other minds, it will not be because they chose to visit us, but because we chose to look deeper. NASA may have looked deeper, but they have not yet chosen to share. Some will defend this. We need verification. We need peer review. We need consensus. But others will say, we need honesty. We need courage. We need to know what NASA already knows. If this silence is temporary, we are in the waiting room of the most important scientific disclosure in history. If it is permanent, then we are in the longest lie ever told. There's a phrase that repeats itself in the corridors of power. Release nothing until we know everything. But that is not science. Science says, release what we know so we may understand what we don't. NASA, in silence, has crossed the line between science and stewardship. And silence, in the face of discovery, is not neutrality. It is choice. So here we stand, between truth and hesitation, between data and disclosure, between Comet and craft. NASA is not denying there's 3IATLAS, but they are not naming it either. Which leaves us with a question, not of technology, not of origin, but of trust. Do we wait for the truth, or do we insist on it? And if NASA's silence represents the first institutional crack in the response to 3IATLAS, then what follows next is a deeper fracture, not in equipment, not in mathematics, but in the very heart of science itself. Because the real struggle here is not about what 3IATLAS is, but about what scientists are willing to say it might be. There's a paradox at the center of science. It is built on the freedom to question. And yet, in practice, there's almost nothing as dangerous as questioning the wrong thing. Nothing proves that more clearly than the reaction to 3IATLAS. Not just to its data, not to its spectral lines or trajectory, but to what it might imply. Because once a scientific anomaly brushes up against the boundary of alien technology, even hypothetically, the physics stops being the issue, the politics begins. No one has felt this more acutely than Professor Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist who had the audacity, not just to calculate the odds, but to follow them where they led. When Loeb suggested that 3I-ATLAS might be an interstellar probe, perhaps one with autonomy sent intentionally, it didn't just ignite debate, it triggered backlash, public criticism, private warnings, professional distancing. And so, in interviews, Loeb asked a simple, damning question. Since when did open-mindedness stop being part of the scientific method? The response was rarely scientific. It was emotional. It was protective, not of truth, but of reputation. Inside conference halls and university lounges, two camps quietly emerged. Camp 1, the investigators, those who say, we should follow the data, even if it leads to a conclusion beyond current models. Camp 2, the gatekeepers, those who warn, we cannot allow alien hypotheses into academic discussion. It damages credibility. In other words, the debate is no longer about whether 3I-ATLAS is unusual. It is about whether scientists are allowed to say so. As Professor Brian Cox once put it, with clarity and sadness, science is not broken by saying we don't know yet. It is broken by pretending we do. Mike, let us be honest. The scientific community is not afraid of 3I-ATLAS. It is afraid of being mocked for how it responds to 3I-ATLAS. There is no academic penalty for saying it's just a rock. But there is for saying, what if it's not? Because once you cross that threshold, even grounded in data, even backed by statistics, you become a fringe thinker, a risk, a liability, which is why Loeb said, in frustration, this is not about evidence, this is about fear of stigma. And so, a quiet tragedy unfolds. The anomaly is real, the data is real, the signatures are recorded, the models are broken, but the conversation is restrained. No one wants to be first, no one wants to say it out loud. We might be studying something that wasn't made by nature, because making that claim doesn't just risk a career, it risks the very identity of human science as the only intelligence in the room. But this hesitation is not scientific, it is human. Science, if honest, should be excited. If we find we are not alone, Brian Cox has said, that would be the most profound discovery in human history. And yet, the reaction we are seeing is the opposite of wonder. It is guarding, of status, of norms, of ego. Loeb described it perfectly. The scientific community is less afraid of being wrong than of being laughed at. That one sentence might define every era where truth was delayed. Copernicus, Galileo, Wegener, Einstein, and now, perhaps, 3I-ATLAS. What makes this moment so critical is not that we lack answers. It's that we lack permission to ask the right questions. We are no longer debating physics. We are debating courage. And that is exactly why 3I-ATLAS matters so much. It is not just a scientific anomaly, it is a cultural test. Do we still believe in discovery, or only in correctness? Do we let data lead us, or do we steer it away from its implications? Do we value the universe more than we value reputation? In this moment, the scientific community faces a crossroads. It can either cling to the illusion of knowledge, or it can expand into the unknown. Because as Cox has reminded us, with the elegant melancholy of cosmic truth, we are a way for the universe to know itself. But that journey only continues if we admit what we do not know. 3I-ATLAS is either the strangest rock ever recorded, or it is the first object in history that was built, not born. Whichever is true, we cannot afford to look away. Not now. Not when the stars have finally spoken. And the only failure left is silence. And if the scientific community is hesitating, torn between curiosity and reputation, then what comes next marks a shift in tone. Because when institutions go silent, sometimes it is the outsiders, the builders, the disruptors who decide to speak. And in this story, that role belongs not to a scientist, but to a strategist of worlds. Elon Musk is not an astronomer. He is not a cosmologist. He is not a peer-reviewed academic. But he is someone who has done what almost no other human being alive has done. He has touched space, not metaphorically, not philosophically, physically. He has built vehicles that break gravity. He has placed satellites in orbit by the thousands. He's building systems not just to escape Earth, but to remain beyond it. And when someone like that comments on 3IATLAS, it is worth listening. It began, as many things in the 21st century do, with a tweet. 3IATLAS is weird. We're tracking. Need answers. Elon Musk, November 2025. No emojis, no sarcasm, no marketing, just 6 words. 3IATLAS is weird. Need answers. But beneath those 6 words lies a seismic shift. Musk is not talking as a spectator. He's talking as a participant. Space is not an abstraction for him. It is a frontier he intends to inhabit. So when he calls an object in that frontier weird, the implication is not scientific speculation. It is operational concern. This is not the first time Musk has stepped into a conversation scientists were struggling to navigate. When government agencies delayed reusable booster technology, he built one. When NASA hesitated to risk crewed missions to Mars, he founded one. When regulators stalled on privatized launch frequencies, he created Starlink and put 6,000 satellites in orbit without permission from academia. The man does not ask for debate, he creates momentum. So when he directs attention to 3IATLAS, the conversation shifts from what does it mean to what are we going to do about it. Why does Musk care? Because 3IATLAS, intentional or not, may not just be a scientific discovery. It might be a navigational object, a technological artifact, a moving industrial body, a prototype for interstellar transfer, a model for non-fuel propulsion, a claim on the future of the solar system. And whether Musk admits it or not, his entire space agenda depends on knowing exactly who and what is already out there. You cannot become a multi-planetary species if someone else already is. It is here that we hear a deeper echo of Cox's wisdom. It is possible we are not the first, only the latest. This is more than philosophic reflection. It is strategy. Baekshi check within days of Musk post. SpaceX engineers reportedly began simulating object paths around 3IATLAS using internal Starlink telemetry. Not public data, but classified sensor readings from low Earth orbit. That's right. Musk isn't waiting for the James Webb. He's leveraging his own satellites. And in the quietly aggressive posture of that move lies the real implication. If governments won't investigate 3IATLAS, the private sector will. This changes everything, because if 3IATLAS is not natural, it may not just be a scientific issue. It becomes a resource issue, a technology race, a ownership question, a geopolitical catalyst. What happens if SpaceX discovers it is artificial? Does one company get to announce it? Does one company get to claim it? What happens if 3IATLAS carries something valuable? Data, metal, structure, or something we can't yet name? This is not conspiracy. This is competition, not of nation versus nation, but of species versus uncertainty. Let us imagine, for a moment, a scenario so believable it borders on inevitable. NASA waits. ESA analyzes. Academia debates. Musk launches a probe, and the first non-human artifact ever discovered is not cataloged by scientists, but intercepted by a corporation. In an era where space is becoming more privatized than politicized, who gets to speak for humanity? A government? A lab? A billionaire? Or perhaps someone we have not met yet? As Brian Cox has reflected on multiple occasions, if we find intelligence out there, the first question will not be scientific. It will be ethical. We are now in the hazy space between discovery and response, between knowing and acting, between evidence and responsibility. Musk's involvement signals a new phase in that transition, because if 3IATLAS demands a future, Musk is someone willing to build toward it, even if that future is not what we expected. So now we must confront a question once unthinkable. What if the first contact event is not led by NASA or the UN or the Vatican, but by SpaceX? What does that mean for humanity, for unity, for history? And what if 3IATLAS is not waiting for diplomats, but for equals? Because perhaps we were not supposed to watch it. We were supposed to follow it. And if Elon Musk's entry into the conversation marks the shift from scientific uncertainty to technological race, then what follows next is not just a debate, it is a conflict. A clash, not between governments or machines, but between minds. A battle fought not in space, but in the equations, egos, and boundaries of physics itself. The universe is quiet, but science is not. And nowhere is that more evident than in the heated arguments erupting across the global scientific community over what 3IATLAS is allowed to mean. Forget what it is. The battle is over what it's permitted to be. 'Tis in labs, lecture halls, and online forums, a fault line has opened. On one side, the conservatives of physics. They are brilliant, disciplined, proud defenders of the standard model. They argue, no alien hypothesis can be considered until every natural explanation has been exhausted. Their motto, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. They fear chaos. They fear ridicule. They fear rewriting the textbooks they built their careers on. They do not lack intelligence. They lack permission. On the other side, the frontiersmen of science. They are not conspiracy theorists. They are empirical radicals. They say, if the data breaks the model must bend, not the data. Bob, led by voices like Avi Loeb, and increasingly by a younger generation without tenure to lose. They demand that science return to its oldest truth, follow the evidence, no matter where it leads. Ori Rome. And so, the war is not about 3IATLAS. It is about who controls the question. The conservatives insist, we already understand comets. To which the frontiersmen reply, then explain this one. The conservatives retort, we have theories. The frontiersmen respond, you have excuses. This is not a scientific disagreement. It is a cultural divide between those who defend the known and those who are willing to step into the unknown, between those who protect the story and those who dare to turn the page. What makes this divide even more profound is that both sides are right. The conservative view upholds scientific rigor. The radical view upholds scientific integrity. Rigor says, don't leap toward answers. Integrity says, don't ignore the impossible. Between those two truths lies the friction that moves science forward. Friction isn't failure. Friction is the fire. As Brian Cox has observed, science is not a series of answers. It is a frontier of questions. But for many scientists today, 3IATLAS is the question they are not allowed to ask. We are watching, in real time, what historians will call the Great Split, a moment where physics turns from solid into fluid, where old laws bend under new evidence, where textbooks become temporary, where certainty fractures and possibility breathes in its place. And we've seen this moment before. Galileo against Aristotle, Einstein against Newton, quantum theory against classical mechanics, continental drift against fixed earth theory, the Big Bang against steady state, black holes against common sense. In each case, science resisted. In each case, science eventually conceded. Progress is not a march, it is a fight. And now, the fight is over this. Is 3IATLAS allowed to be artificial? Not is it artificial, but are we even allowed to say it might be? The answer so far is no, at least in public, which is why the battle is visible not in journals, but in podcasts, not in boardrooms, but in live streams, not in formal proceedings, but in whispers. Technology accelerates, science hesitates, truth waits, and yet, one thing has always been true and always will be. Reality is not changed by our beliefs. Only our beliefs are changed by reality. Brian Cox. 3IATLAS exists. Its anomalies exist. Its path is recorded. Its composition is documented. The universe has already spoken. Science is arguing with itself about how to listen. Which leaves us with one final question. If this is not a comet, and if it is not a ship we are ready to accept, who gets to decide what it is? Not the public, not the government, not even the scientists, but the future. Because 3IATLAS is not just data, it is precedent. And what we choose to call it now will define how we react to what comes next. And if the physics war is the battle over how we interpret 3I-ATLAS, then what comes next cuts even deeper into what we fear it might be doing. Because once an object defies nature, refuses decay, and follows a steady path through the solar system, the question is no longer just what it is, but why it is here. Every era has its metaphor, its story told in symbols, because the truth is too difficult to say directly. For ancient Greece, it was the Trojan Horse, a gift, a vessel, seemingly passive, silent, harmless, and inside, intention. Now, for the first time in the history of space observation, that metaphor has crossed from myth into astronomy. Because one of the most unsettling hypotheses now rising around 3I-ATLAS is this. It might not be the thing we're supposed to be watching. It might be the carrier. The hypothesis is simple and terrible. 3I-ATLAS is not a craft, but a delivery system. A vessel that, at Perihelion, the point of maximum sunlight, maximum heating, may have released something smaller, something we cannot track, something we cannot see, something that does not emit nickel, something that does not glow blue, something now drifting silently through the solar system. Because if you wanted to observe a planetary system without being seen, you would not send a 5-kilometer object made of metal. You would send something smaller, something that hides in the noise. In the language of modern space technology, the mothership deploys the microprobes. This is not science fiction. This is aerospace logic, even on Earth today. When I see we launch rocket bodies to deploy satellites. We deploy swarms of drones from aircraft. We build mothership craft to release scouts. We minimize signatures for stealth reconnaissance. So if an advanced civilization wanted to explore a solar system without interacting, what would they do? They would not send themselves. They would send observers, silent, neutral, long-lasting, autonomous, objects that look like small rocks, or dust, or nothing at all. Because the best way to go unseen is to hide as what already exists. Samaskar when suddenly, the data we have begins to look different. 3I-ATLAS did not break apart at Perihelion. It flared. It did not lose mass. It released something else. We saw the nickel spike. We saw the light shift. We saw the anomalous acceleration. But what we did not see was what may have left. Why? Because our instruments are not built to detect stillness. No scientist alive can track an object smaller than 1 meter, without thermal signature, with no rotation, no reflection, and no transmission. If the Trojan Horse hypothesis is true, then 3I-ATLAS did not come here to be studied. It came here to deploy something that will study us. Imagine, for a moment, the perspective of a civilization watching our sky. They do not need warships. They do not need contact. They do not need permission. They need data. They need perspective. And so they send not greetings, but instruments. Instruments that make our telescopes useless. Instruments that hide in the void between planetary orbits. That drift in relic asteroid belts. That ride radiation currents like seeds on the wind. We have always assumed alien intelligence would want to be seen. What if they want only to see us? Brian Cox has said, with the humility of a scientist who knows we do not yet matter to the galaxy, if we are not alone, we are not necessarily interesting. What if 3I-ATLAS is not a beginning, but a continuation? What if others have passed before? What if this is not the first time the solar system has been scanned? And what if the only reason we saw 3I-ATLAS is because we are finally smart enough to notice? Let us also consider the other possibility. What if 3I-ATLAS did not release anything? What if it received something? What if the true interaction did not happen at Perihelion, but now, somewhere in our system, invisible, active, patient? That is the darkest version of this idea. Not hostile, not invasive, but indifferent. The universe may not be full of watchers who want to rule or conquer, but watchers who simply catalog, because nothing is more alien than curiosity without empathy. But the Trojan Horse hypothesis is not about warfare. It is about scale, civilizational scale. A civilization that builds interstellar probes is not trying to impress us. It is trying to endure. Perhaps in its mind, 3IATLAS is not a ship, but a seed. And perhaps we are the soil. So now we ask the question that bridges science and myth. If the door has already opened, are we inside the Trojan Horse, or is it already inside us? Either way, the watchers do not announce themselves. They do not need to, because the act of watching is already power. And if 3IATLAS truly behaved like a Trojan horse, hiding intention behind the appearance of a comet, then what follows next is a paradox, a question as haunting as it is illuminating. If it is artificial, then why didn't it try to hide? The night sky is vast, our instruments are limited, our perspective is microscopic. If 3IATLAS, or whatever intelligence may lie behind it, wanted to remain unseen, it could have, easily. All it had to do was behave like a rock. No nickel emissions, no acceleration, no blue light, no alignment with the planetary plane, just drift, like trillions of other fragments in space. Instead, it did everything but that. It shone, it moved, it erupted, it broke models. It asked, silently, to be noticed. And that brings us to a question both terrifying and profound. What if it did not want to hide? Let's imagine two scenarios, both equally astonishing. One, it wants to be detected, not for contact, not for conversation, but because its very existence is the message, a silent signal, a cosmic announcement not written in words, but in behavior, as if to say, we are not invisible, we are simply uninterested in secrecy. Maybe hiding is beneath its purpose. Maybe we are not a threat to be feared, but a milestone to be observed. As Cox once put it, the universe is under no obligation to make sense, but it always leaves clues we cannot ignore. But 3IATLAS is not a whisper, it is a statement. 2. It doesn't care whether we notice. Perhaps we are not watching it. Perhaps it is watching something else. And we are merely in the viewing frame, like ants who finally detected the hum of a distant highway. To us, it feels personal. To it, we may be incidental. After all, it emitted industrial materials as though indifferent to surveillance. It altered trajectory as if no one was charting it. It crossed perihelion without adjusting to hide its anomalies. That is not stealth. That is confidence. The confidence of something that has either been here before or was not built to care who's looking. Let's dig deeper. If 3IATLAS is artificial, then the question isn't, why didn't it hide? The real question is, why did we expect it to? We assume advanced intelligence would approach with secrecy, caution, or diplomacy, because that is what we would do. But as Cox often reminds us, the assumption that alien minds would think like ours is not just arrogant, it is statistically absurd. Perhaps we are not the audience. Perhaps this mission is not exploratory, but routine. Not urgent, but ancient. Not urgent, but inevitable. Let's turn the question around. Why do we hide? To gain advantage, to survive threats, to study without detection, to protect ourselves from harm. What if none of that applies? What if a civilization millions of years ahead of us has nothing to fear? Not from our weapons, not from our curiosity, not from our analysis. A lion does not hide from ants. A civilization that has mastered interstellar movement would have no need to impress us, nor any need to conceal itself from us. If in that light, 3IATLAS makes more sense. It is not broadcasting, because it does not require response. It is not cloaked, because it does not require safety. It is not evasive, because it does not recognize us as relevant. To a being that lives in cosmic time, we are not a threat. We are a moment. Think about that. For us, this is the most important discovery in history. For it, this may just be another orbit, another cycle, another checkpoint in a mission far larger than anything we could imagine. There's a kind of humility in that thought, not despair, but scale. As Cox so often says, with quiet awe, we do not live in the universe. We are the universe, briefly alive. Perhaps 3IATLAS is here not to be seen, but to remind us that our sight is not the center. And yet, here's the twist. If 3i Atlas didn't hide, maybe it knew we would find it. Maybe the lack of concealment is the concealment. Because nothing is more invisible to us than what we dismiss as impossible. A blue object, industrial metals, non-gravitational thrust. Ridiculous. Until it isn't. So this then is the deeper answer to the question, why didn't it hide? Perhaps it didn't have to. Perhaps we were too afraid to look long enough. Perhaps the truth was never hidden from us. We hid ourselves from the truth. And what if 3i Atlas is not the first to pass through our sky? What if it is the first we were able to see? And if 3i Atlas didn't hide, and we have finally begun to acknowledge, even silently, that its behavior defies natural classification, then what happens next is both unprecedented and deeply revealing. The world's only United Nations-approved planetary monitoring network has just taken action. Not because 3i Atlas is on a collision course, but because it's not. In 2013, after the Chelyabinsk meteor injured over 1,500 people and shattered glass across 6 cities, the United Nations reacted with something humanity had never attempted before: the creation of a planet-wide system to monitor and coordinate responses to potential space threats. It was called the International Asteroid Warning Network, the IAWN. Its purpose was clear: spot objects that could threaten Earth, share data across borders, coordinate global defense if needed. Its focus was not on objects that pass harmlessly, not on comets, not on interstellar visitors, just impactors. So when the IAWN activated a special operations level monitoring alert for 3i Atlas in early December 2025, something unprecedented happened. Humanity, for the first time in history, decided that an object which is not on a collision course still needs to be watched. Why? Because what 3i Atlas is doing is more alarming than where it's going. Let's be precise. 3i Atlas will pass at 1.8 AU, nearly twice the distance between Earth and the Sun. No known impact probability, no orbital intersection, no thermal detonation risk, no destructive debris cone. It is not a threat, not physically. And yet, the IAWN has redirected ground telescopes, retasked planetary radars, and notified partnered space agencies of a target of strategic scientific interest. The phrasing is clinical, but the decision is not. It means, this object should not be ignored. Something about it demands attention. In the language of global diplomacy, that is quietly revolutionary. If for the first time, an international defense network created to fight asteroids is watching something because it might not be an asteroid at all. Not because it is dangerous, but because it is unknown. This is not fear-based behavior. This is detection protocol evolving in real time. We are watching the moment where humanity stops only tracking what might harm us and starts tracking what might redefine us. It is worth noting what IAWN does not do. It does not send out public statements. It does not deal in speculation. It does not alert the media. It does not interfere in academic analysis. It does not track harmless rocks for fun. It acts only when the boundary between object and event begins to blur. And 3i Atlas has blurred that boundary. Violently. Let's hit the deeper layer. If IAWN is now watching objects without collision vectors, then humanity has stepped into a new phase of planetary awareness. A phase not shaped by impact risk, but by information risk. Because the unknown does not have to crash into Earth to change human history. It merely has to exist. It merely has to arrive. And here's where Cox's perspective becomes central. Not in science, but in civics of the cosmos. We have spent centuries asking whether we are alone. Maybe we should have been preparing for the day we are not. IOEN's activation tells us, that day may be now. The danger is not physical. It is epistemological. It is the threat of not understanding what has come near us. Because if this is technology, or worse, routine, then Earth may no longer be a bystander, but a subject. Consider this analogy. In the Stone Age, if a metal tool was found beside a river, the first question wouldn't be, is it a weapon? It would be, who made this? And are they returning? 3i Atlas is cosmic metallurgy. It is compositional clarity. It is motion without mechanics. And now, the stewards of planetary defense are acting as if it might not be alone. That is the radical shift. ILBUN is not preparing us for impact. It is preparing us for contact, quietly, carefully, professionally. Because if 3IATLAS has been here before, or if it is not the last of its kind, then the Earth must be ready, not with weapons, not with panic, but with eyes. And so now the question deepens. If the world's highest space alert system is tracking an object with no physical threat, then what exactly are we protecting? The answer, our place in the universe. Because once we accept that not all visitors come with collision paths, we must also accept that not all visitors come for us, which leaves us only one option: to learn, to listen, to stay awake. As Cox says, with rare gravity, perhaps the greatest responsibility of intelligence is to recognize intelligence beyond itself. We are no longer defending Earth from impact. We are defending Earth from ignorance. And if the IEEWN's activation marks the moment humanity officially began watching 3IATLAS, not as a threat, but as a presence, then the next part takes us somewhere even more urgent, the ticking clock. Because whatever 3IATLAS is, whatever it was made to do, whatever it may already have done, we now have a deadline to decide how we will respond. On paper, it is nothing, just a number, just a date. December 19th, 2025, the day 3IATLAS reaches its closest approach, 1.8 astronomical units from Earth. That's 270 million kilometers, far enough from collision, close enough for clarity, close enough for decisions. That moment, just 46 days away, finally will be the countdown not to impact, but to identity. What is 3IATLAS? A comet with industrial trace metals? A probe with unknown architecture? A mothership gone silent? A surveyor older than our species? A routine object in someone else's sky? We don't know yet. But we do know this. We have only 46 days left to find out, before it leaves us behind. Let's strip the poetry away and get scientific. 46 days until the last ideal observational window closes. 46 days until reflected light drops below spectroscopic precision. 46 days until radar interference increases from the sun. 46 days until trajectory monitoring becomes 90% less accurate. 46 days until post-perihelion signals degrade. We are not counting down to an event. We are counting down to a loss of opportunity. After December 19th, we may never see 3IATLAS this clearly again. Not in our lifetime, not with our current technology, not with our existing worldview. This is not a countdown to impact. It is a countdown to irreversibility. The Professor Brian Cox spoke once about the transience of celestial observation. The universe is a brilliant teacher, but it does not repeat itself for our convenience. 3IATLAS is a teacher, not one we summoned, not one we expected, but one we may never have another chance to study. And so the 46 days are not a countdown to destruction, but to decision. The question we now face is not scientific, it is civilizational. What kind of species will we be when the unknown comes near? Skeptical, curious, or afraid? Will we launch a probe, publicly disclose the full data, share the truth between nations, admit what the observations now suggest, break the taboo of intelligent cause, or will we let 3IATLAS slip away to one day become an ancient footnote? There was something once, we chose not to look closely. Let's go even further. What if this is it? What if this is truly the moment when the universe opened the curtain and the audience did nothing? What if 5 centuries from now, historians write, humanity saw the first non-natural object in space and debated instead of responding? Science fiction likes to imagine dramatic first contact, bright lights, alien languages, signals decoded, skies darkened. But what if reality is quieter? What if first contact is not cinematic, but bureaucratic? A telescope schedule, a classified image, a countdown clock that no one watches. Here is the startling truth of this moment. 42 years after the WOW signal, 26 years after Oumuamua. We are here again, not ignored by the universe, but offered something. A question, a riddle, a presence, and we get to choose. Do we bite our tongue? Do we protect our pride? Do we let the unknown pass unchallenged? Or do we try, even if we fail, even if we are wrong? Because the greatest mistake in the cosmos has never been being wrong. It has always been not asking. Yet we have 46 days left. 46 days to point all the instruments we have. 46 days to demand the truth from space agencies. 46 days to put aside ridicule. And remember what makes us human. Not certainty, but wonder. As Cox says, with reverence, not despair, there's no greater privilege than being alive at the moment the universe reveals itself. Perhaps this is that moment, and the clock has already started. And if the 46-day countdown is a reminder that our time to observe 3IATLAS is finite, then what comes next is humanity's response. Not in whispers, not in silence, but in focus. The greatest instruments ever built by human hands, the sharpest mirrors we've ever aimed at the cosmos, are now turning toward this object. And for the first time, the whole world is watching the same point in space. There's something sacred in the act of observation. Humanity's greatest telescopes, from orbiting giants to mountaintop mirrors, were not created to spy or conquer, but to understand. And now, they share a target. Not a new star, not a distant galaxy, not a black hole's shadow, but a 5-kilometer object drifting inside our inner solar system. Quiet, blue, and impossibly deliberate. For the first time in recorded history, nearly every major observatory on Earth and beyond is aligned on a single unknown. Let's list them. Hubble Space Telescope, Visible Light Spectrum, James Webb Space Telescope, Deep IR, Compositional Breakdown, Arecibo Successor Arrays, Low Frequency Radar Echo, VLT and Keck, Ground-Based Spectroscopy, DES, ALMA and NOEMA, Millimeter Wave Thermal Mapping, DSN, Deep Space Network, Potential Signal Anomaly Tracking, Green Bank Telescope, Radio Silence Observation, YEN, NASA's NEOWISE, Thermal Infrared Object Mapping, ESA's Gaia Unit, Predictive Astrometric Pathways, Planetary Radar System, Pinging Surface Irregularities. Never in over 200,000 years of our existence has the species done anything like this. We are, for a brief and extraordinary moment, unified by wonder. Why is this extraordinary? Because telescopes, like nations, like funding, like humans, rarely point in the same direction. Each has its own mission, its own roadmap, its own competition. But 3IATLAS has broken that instinct. It is no longer a curiosity of astronomers. It is now the central node of a planetary question. What is it? Where did it come from? Why does it possess elements nature should never refine? Why is it accelerating without force? Why does it align with the plane of the planets? Why did it explode without fragmenting? And the newest question, is it alone? This moment tells us something deeper about ourselves. We are not united by war. We are not united by politics. We are not united by belief. We are united by the unknown, by the questions we cannot answer alone, by the things that make us feel small, and yet impossibly alive. This is where Brian Cox's voice lands with meaning. We seek not because we are powerful, but because we are curious. And curiosity is the greatest force this universe has ever seen. Mike, let's break this down. For the first time since the launch of the Apollo missions, multiple world powers are sharing data in near real time. Not for survival, not for profit, but for clarity. U.S. astronomers are working with Chinese observatories. ESA is sharing spectral results with India and Japan. Private networks like Starlink and Amazon Kuiper are lending signal stability. Even amateur astronomers have detected it. And in small forums, among low-magnification skywatchers, a new kind of legend is forming. Not of gods, not of monsters, but of presences. And in every spectrograph, in every live feed, every pixel, one truth is becoming undeniable. 3IATLAS is not going away. It is not fading. It is not stabilizing into predictable physics. It is holding. It is choosing persistence. Imagine looking through a telescope all your life and seeing the same thing. Stars expand, comets dissolve, planets orbit, galaxies recede, always predictable, always beautiful. And then one night, You see behavior that should not exist, a composition that should not occur, a movement that refuses math, a chemical ratio that mocks the periodic table. You don't just look, you witness. That is the moment Earth is in now. And that is why every lens, every dish, every panoramic eye is turned toward it. Because the universe speaks. But only when we are quiet enough to listen. But with all eyes aligned toward the sky, a new level of tension emerges. What if seeing is not enough? What if 3IATLAS is not here to be observed, but to observe us? What if this alignment is not a search for answers, but a kind of mirror, a cosmic test? Will we respond with fear, with denial, with violence, with disinterest? Or will we, finally, be the species that deserves to understand? Perhaps that's what makes this moment sacred. Not that we are looking at something unknown, but that the unknown has finally given us something to look together. And for once, we are not divided by it. We are defined by it. As Cox has beautifully put it, in the face of the infinite, we don't shrink. We expand. And if the greatest observatories on Earth are now united in their focus, and the countdown to 3IATLAS's closest approach has begun, then what comes next is the quiet battle at the heart of every discipline. The struggle between the pursuit of truth and the protection of pride. Between what science is and what scientists fear it might force them to become. Science has never just been about knowledge. It has always been about courage. The courage to ask, the courage to doubt, the courage to be wrong, even publicly, even catastrophically. But when faced with something like 3IATLAS, that courage is tested in a way no peer review or laboratory experiment can simulate. Because 3IATLAS isn't just a comet or an anomaly. It is a philosophical intruder, a wedge driven into the vulnerable space between evidence and ego. Ausgegassak for the first time in modern astronomy, the world's most trusted experts, brilliant, decorated, awarded scientists, are being forced to confront the question, are we willing to follow the truth, even if it makes us look foolish for everything we believed before? And the answer, whispered in hallways and closed-door committees, seems to be, only if we don't have to admit it clearly. The silence of institutions is not just strategic, it is protective, not of people, but of prestige. Look carefully, and you'll see the tension everywhere. A peer-reviewed paper that describes 3IATLAS in detail, but avoids the word artificial like a plague. A conference speech that references unknown active mechanism, but never says engine. A NASA release describing composition inconsistent with known solar system materials, but without using the term manufactured. It's not a lack of evidence, it's a lack of permission. Science is prepared to revise textbooks, but it is not prepared to revise itself. Here lies the tragic irony. The very discipline that prides itself on truth above all else is now wrestling with the one truth it cannot speak, that we may not be alone, that the laws we revere may not be universal, that intelligence may not be ours to define anymore. Brian Cox once said, "The humility to accept the limits of our knowledge is the foundation of all discovery." But for many scientists, humility is not protection, it is exposure, to ridicule, to identity crisis, to the terror of irrelevance. So we are not just watching a battle of theories, we're watching a battle for dignity. Because if 3IATLAS turns out not to be natural, then decades, perhaps centuries, of assumptions must be shredded. And the people who built their lives around those assumptions must face what every explorer eventually must. Someone got here before us. To the fearful, this is humiliation. To the curious, this is liberation. To the cosmos, it is continuity. But let us be honest. It is not irrational for scientists to fear this moment. We are a species raised on the narrative of human exceptionalism. We do not want to be third, or late, or one of many. But perhaps that is the destiny of an awakened species, not to rule the stars, but to join them. When the New York Times asked Professor Lopus whether he felt ostracized for his stance on 3IATLAS and its predecessor Oumuamua, he replied, "I'm not afraid of being wrong. I'm afraid of us being afraid." That fear is not the fear of meaninglessness, it is the fear of change. And yet, as Cox beautifully frames, the universe has always demanded change of us. The only question is whether we welcome it or resist it. Let us not forget, Every shattered certainty is a passageway. Every discomfort is a compass. 3IATLAS is not threatening our world. It is threatening our sense of world. And the only dignity worth protecting now is the dignity of truth. Perhaps this is the quiet test we are being given. Not of science, but of self-respect. Will we choose the comfort of formulas or the challenge of possibility? Will we keep our dignity by denial or by discovery? History will not remember how long we delayed. It will remember whether we dared. And if the struggle between scientific truth and personal dignity is now fully exposed, then what comes next is larger than science, larger than institutions, larger than pride. Because 3IATLAS does not just challenge one field or one theory, it challenges the entire arc of humanity. Not with violence, not with invasion, but with a question so old and so heavy that the stars themselves have been holding it still, waiting for us to be ready. Since the first time our ancestors looked up and saw the night sky without fear of predators or hunger, we have carried a question in our bones. Are we alone? Not, are there microbes on Europa? Not, are there bacteria under Mars? But alone in the way that matters, alone in mind, alone in meaning, alone in intention, alone in story. And for centuries, we have assumed, in silence or in arrogance, that the answer was yes. That this planet, spinning on the quiet edge of a quiet galaxy, was home not only to life, but to mind, to consciousness, to technology, to self-awareness. We were the first. We were the only. We were the authors. And now, floating in the void of space like an uninvited comma, comes 3IATLAS. Not a message, not a warning, not even a clear encounter. Just existence, a quiet, unbelievable existence. And in that existence, the question returns, what if we are not alone? But this time, it does not sound like wonder. It sounds like responsibility. Here is the true weight of 3IATLAS. It does not ask us to fear. It does not ask us to worship. It does not ask us to fight. It asks us to grow up, to become a species that does not define its worth by being first, but by being ready. Ready to learn, ready to respond, ready to admit we are not the ceiling of intelligence, but the floor of understanding. Brian Cox summarized this beautifully once. If there is life out there, it likely isn't waiting for us. So the real question becomes, are we ready to meet ourselves beyond Earth? Because that is what this moment truly reveals. Humanity is not being asked whether it believes in aliens. It is being asked whether it is ready to be a species among species. Not the center, not the masterpiece, but a participant, a voice among voices, a civilization among civilizations. Let's imagine, for a moment, what it means if 3IATLAS is artificial. It means intelligence existed elsewhere. It means technology was mastered elsewhere. It means purpose was formed elsewhere. It means curiosity is not unique. But more than that, it means we have been seen, even if only as a footnote, even if only as a region of interest, even if only as a brief flicker of atmosphere on a pale blue sphere, that in itself changes everything, not because it diminishes us, but because it dignifies the universe. And let's face the question directly. What are we now? If we are not alone, we must decide who we will be in a larger cosmic story. The child who denies what he sees, the warrior who panics at the unknown, the scientist who demands proof and refuses wonder, the cynic who says nothing matters unless it matters to us, or the explorer who says, quietly, show me more. Maybe the real question is not, are we alone? Maybe it is, are we ready not to be? In 1969, as humans first set foot on the moon, Carl Sagan predicted, sooner or later, we will recognize that the cosmos is not a stage for our species alone. It has taken 56 years, and now a silent object, cold as metal and old as time, drifting with intention across the emptiness, has made that sentence a mirror. Not for science, but for civilization. Because in that mirror we see our hunger for certainty, our fear of irrelevance, our need for control, our longing for communion, and whether we meet another mind tomorrow or whether 3IATLAS leaves us unanswered. One truth has already arrived. We are no longer the only question. We are part of the answer. And that is the moment when a species truly enters history, not because it discovers, but because it accepts. Mom, Sawan sunk they prepare for the final moment. And if 3i Atlas has forced us to confront everything from physics to philosophy, from fear to possibility, then what comes now is not an ending, but a moment suspended, the pause before revelation, the breath held in the dark before the first light breaks the horizon. December 19th, 2025. No cataclysm, no collision, no radio burst, no glowing sky, just a date, just a distance, just an object passing through the solar system, unshaken, unbroken, unbound, on a course that suggests design, and a purpose we cannot yet name. And yet, that day will be remembered, not because of what 3i Atlas did, but because of what it made us consider. For the first time in history, humanity has been forced to ask, out loud, in daylight, with telescopes and microphones and trembling voices, what if this is not ours? What if intelligence did not begin here? What if technology is not a uniquely human fire? What if the long silence we mistook for loneliness, this was simply a distance we had not yet bridged? We are living now in a moment between knowing and not knowing, between the ancient question and the inevitable answer. What comes next? We no longer have the luxury of certainty. We can no longer say we are alone, nor can we say we are not. We are suspended, not in ignorance, but in awakening. Abkosharik Spanish Brian Cox once said, with the awe of someone who understands what it means to be small, in a vast universe, we are a way for the cosmos to know itself, but perhaps we are not the first way. What if we are not the beginning of intelligence, but simply the latest witness? Perhaps 3i Atlas is not a visitor. Perhaps it is a messenger, not to speak to us, but to remind us that we are already part of something larger, something in motion before our sun was born, and still moving long after we are dust. The night before dawn is the hardest part of every story. The darkness feels permanent, the questions feel heavy, the silence feels full. And yet, dawn always comes, whether we are ready or not because of hope, not because of destiny, but because the universe does not wait for us to understand it. It simply keeps becoming, and we must choose, every generation, whether to shrink from that becoming or step into it. So here we stand, a species at the threshold of cosmic adolescence, watching an object older than our civilizations, carrying signatures we cannot replicate, drifting through our star system with impossible calm. And perhaps the question is no longer, what is 3i Atlas, but what do we become when we meet it? We can choose fear, we can choose denial, we can choose silence, or we can choose wonder. The kind of wonder that led us to split the atom, land on the moon, decode genomes, and point glass and metal into space just to hear a whisper from the void. The kind of wonder that made us human in the first place. The kind that says, there's more. There's always been more. And now, we are finally ready to see it. Now December 19th will pass. The night before dawn is ending. Whether the light that follows is scientific or spiritual or technological is no longer up to 3i Atlas. It's up to us. History will not remember what it was. It will remember what we became because of it. The sky is watching. The universe is waiting. And for the first time, so are we.